Love is like a blessing from the King's only love can bring the healing from the Queen's. Love is like a blessing from the King's only love can bring the healing from the Queen.
And welcome, people. This presentation is called West Africa Before the Common Era, the Black Mestory. In this Black Mestory series, we take an in-depth look at the region of West Africa, defined in a broad context as being as far north as Mauritania and as far east as Chad, with the Central African Republic and the southeast curving into Cameroon. This episode focuses on West Africa before the Common Era, going back to the earliest records of human habitation in the region through to the start of the first millennium in this Common Era. To accept the theories that have been coming out of contemporary science perspective, we would have to conclude based on the up-to-date findings, as our research has shown in part 1 of the Africa a Black Mestory series, that the first humans to be located in the region were a splinter grouping that had migrated up to Mali from Gabon and Congo region around 200,000 BCE. This after having arrived in Gabon and Congo region from Kenya nearly 100,000 years before that, and leaving the territories in between uninhabited, most notably from a West African perspective, Nigeria. This on its own makes the prospect of such an event having taken place doubtful, but to take into consideration the presence of the now extinct Neanderthal type hominins all over the continent during these times makes the possibility of long distance travel by large migratory groups even more negligible. It has been theorized in this research that the various Neanderthal type species were a dangerous and hostile breed, not only strong and robust, but also intelligent, capable of herding and farming humans in the same sense that humans deal in relation to cattle, rearing them to prime maturity, probably around 30, before slaughtering them for food stock. Where living under such conditions, records of human presence would be difficult, if at all possible, to find. It wouldn't be difficult to see this as being the case for Asia and Europe as well, where breeds of Neanderthals were numerous. We theorize that where the Neanderthals began to die off in various territories due to their bloodthirsty cannibalistic practices, human presence starts to become evident as they start to live independently, developing intellectually and even surviving into old age. So this is how the emergence of humans in Mali around 200,000 BCE is viewed in this Black Mestory, occurring around the same time as humans are also appearing in pockets in Ethiopia in the east and Tunisia on the north coast. These earliest of West Africans are forest dwellers, from where they received their protection against alien intrusion. A further pocket of human presence would appear 100,000 years later in Nigeria, making only 2 regions in the whole of West Africa where evidence of Homo sapien presence has been found for the time period around 100,000 BCE. Another pocket emerged 40,000 years later in Niger. But after 15,000 BCE, When virtually all of the Neanderthal types had become extinct, more pockets would start appearing across West Africa. And by 10,000 BCE, signs begin to appear of human advancement beyond a simple forest-dwelling culture. In Mauritania, the people there had begun following a nomadic lifestyle, influenced by their northern neighbours in Morocco, joining them in the seasonal journey from west heading eastwards, even reaching as far as the Nile region and beyond into Ethiopia on some occasions, led by their herds of various animals that marched in unison towards the rising sun. There was always excitement on the trail, with much singing and dancing as the non-stop music played all day and all night. Rock art would also be created within the caves that they would use as stop-off points as they travelled, and they would always have amazing stories to entertain their guests with, telling of the many strange and marvellous things that they had seen on their adventures. It is very likely that this nomadic activity was a significant factor in the development of a settlement on the west coast at Senegal, almost mirroring what was happening on the east coast in Djibouti, as groups of retired nomads and travelling East Africans or Kushites moved south towards the Senegal River and onto the coast, where they would begin introducing agricultural farming activities and pottery production, as well as fishing and shipbuilding operations. Jonathan Olomide Lucas supports the idea of early contact between East and West Africa in his book, The Religion of the Yorubas, 1948, suggesting that contact between the East and the West dated from centuries antecedent to the establishment of the old Egyptian kingdom. Unfortunately for the West African shipbuilders, if they had ventured out to sea, as was happening on the East Coast, they would have found it a much more perilous task, of which most attempts would probably have failed. But it cannot be assumed that none of their attempts ever made it to the Americas during this early time. As Cheikh Anta Diop says in his book, Pre-Colonial Black Africa, 1960,
love is like a blessing from the King's only love can bring the healing from the Queen's love.
And for the avoidance of any doubt, this quote from Walter Rodney's book, A History of Upper Guinea, 1545 to 1800, published in 1970, should also be remembered. The canoe could vary from the tiniest of vessels to sophisticated craft capable of traveling on the open seas. The trend of abandoning the forest-dwelling culture has also been picked up in Mali, probably influenced by retired nomads and friendly Kushites. Here, agricultural farming and the production of pottery had also begun, along with the concept of domesticating cattle. By 8000 BCE, the major changes were happening towards the east of the western region, as outlined in this Mestory. This was in Chad, where nomads suddenly appeared, and further south in Central African Republic, where a splinter group from these nomads migrated to, adopting a sedentary lifestyle incorporating agricultural farming and fishing. The sudden migration south from the North Sahara region occurred because of desiccation that had started happening towards the east. This may also have coincided with the ancient Egyptians' building of the Sphinx, which could be taken as a clear indication of their negative feelings towards nomadism as a lifestyle, which they viewed as being a destructive and unclean practice. 1,000 years later, the people of the Niger region began themselves to follow a nomadic lifestyle, influenced by the nomads who they would encounter coming from both east and west. Whilst further south in Nigeria, the people there had developed a shipbuilding culture along the rivers of northeast Nigeria that flowed into Lake Chad, using them to support their trade exchange operations on both sides of the lake that may have even stretched as far as Kenya. By 4000 BCE, Nigeria had seen the introduction of farming practices and pottery production into their lifestyle practices of its people, probably influenced by the contacts they were making with the nomads and Kushites on the other side of the lake. Meanwhile, desiccation in the Sahara region had spread further west into Niger, causing the nomadic herders there to migrate west into Mali. South of this location, in Burkina Faso, the introduction of agricultural farming practices can be noted around the same time. Desiccation would continue to spread west, this time reaching into Mali by 3000 BCE, forcing the inhabitants there further south where they would begin following agricultural farming practices. Across in southeast Nigeria, the Unsuldi Steppen pyramids were being built, again most probably inspired by their experiences whilst trading on the other side of the lake, potentially reaching up into Sudan and Egypt where the first step pyramids were erected. The desiccation taking place in the Sahara region would continue to spread westward, reaching into Mauritania by the start of the next millennium. The nomads located there were forced towards the coast, where they began to temper their nomadic practices, replacing it with a more semi-nomadic lifestyle, even building stone-based settlements and introducing a fishing and shipbuilding culture out towards the coast like their neighbours further south in Senegal. Possibly because of an expansion of the forest dwellers in neighbouring Ivory Coast, we have the earliest signs of human habitation in Ghana around this same period. Whilst in Nigeria, we have the first introduction of iron smelting practices in West Africa for the manufacture of tools and weapons. Again, the introduction of this practice is possibly influenced through the contacts that they had been successful in making with Kushites in Sudan, Egypt, and Kenya. By 1000 BCE, the iron smelting practices that had been followed in Nigeria had been passed on to their close neighbours in Burkina Faso, showing an existence of trading relations between the two regions. The link between the two territories also demonstrates that the countries lying in between, Benin and Togo, were at this time still uninhabited forest land, with no signs of human presence recorded for this period. The relatively new innovation of ironworking would also be introduced by the Nigerians into Cameroon and further into Central Africa as part of the cultural exchange known in modern times as the Bantu expansion. The Seoul Civilization would expand from southern Chad into northern Cameroon around 800 BCE, but more significantly at this time, West Africa was to experience slave raids to service the Phoenicians, who had started carrying out trade with the Africans on the north coast in Morocco. The raids would go down into Mauritania, capturing prisoners whose ship expertise was useful to the Phoenicians, whose lives were spent largely at sea. The final major event to happen in West Africa during the final Millennium BCE occurred about midway through, when drought in Mali saw a wave of mass migration into the previously uninhabited Sierra Leone between 500 and 400 BCE. By the end of the first millennium BCE, the greater majority of the inhabited territories of West Africa had settled into sedentary lifestyle practices. In the northeastern Sahara bordering portion of the West African region, encompassing Chad and Niger, semi-nomadic practices were still being maintained to some extent, whilst in the Ivory Coast and Ghana, the Africans there were living what seems to be a peaceful forest-dwelling existence. Some slave raiding activity will still have been going on in modern-day Mauritania, but this time for the purposes of servicing the Roman slave markets on the north coast and beyond. Guinea, Liberia, Togo and Benin were at this time still uninhabited forest lands.
Love is like a blessing from the King's only love can bring the healing from the Queen's. Love is like a blessing from the King's only love can bring the healing from the Queen.